This is the Living in Clarity podcast. Today we have content creator and Jewish educator Hila Oz joining the show. Welcome, Hila.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
I was so excited for you because I remember I saw your video one time just like, a few months ago. I'm like, who is this girl? I said, Brandon, we got to get her. She's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you. I don't know. It's like weird that people know me without knowing me. Like, I don't know. It's bizarre when people like stop me on the street and then I have to be like, did I like meet this person and forget who they are? Or do they know me from the internet? That's like a very weird.
Well, you're so passionate. It's unbelievable.
I like, I don't know. I'm very into like mazalot and whatever. And if you look at my mazal, like I was born in the month of anger, on the day, the week of anger, and in the hour of anger, which translates to passion and like it's good measurement. When I'm not angry, but I've always been like a truth seeker. It's always been like my MO. People ask me about like my Baal Tshuva journey and they're like, what happened? I'm like, I don't know. I just realized it was true and then I did it.
Yeah.
And don't do that.
Let's go back. Let's go back to where that happened though. Where were you? Where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Before you.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, of course. So I grew up in a suburb of Los Angeles called Santa Clarita, which has 3 Jews. Yeah. We grew up going to Chabad because my dad's Sephardi, Masorati, and he was very adamant that we should go to like a quote unquote real shul. And I remember fighting him on that. Jokes on him because now I'm Haredi. But
where would you have wanted to go?
I was like, I thought we more aligned with like the conservative. There was like one of each. And I grew up going to like Ramah and USY, so I was like, why don't we do that? And my dad was like, no, it should have a mechitza. And I'm like, that's oppressive, and look at me now. We grew up Masorati.
Just for some of our viewers.
Traditional. It's most Sephardim don't really fall in the categories of like Orthodox conservative reform. That's more of an Ashkenazi thing. So Sephardim are kind of like, by and large, the Torah is true and we believe in it. Whether or not we practice it is kind of up to how we feel. And so God was always a big part of our life, and Jewish identity was always a big thing, but we just didn't really keep any of it.
But why was your dad in Santa Clarita? Why there?
From what I think it was because the public schools were really good. It was either, LAUSD, which is kind of a mess, or like tens of thousands of dollars for Jewish private school. Right. And they were like, well, Santa Clarita has like the top rated public schools in the state. And so we got that education. And so I went to public school up until, and then I went to community college and then transferred to UCLA. And it was actually at UCLA that I met Rabbi Naftali Hanfling, who was the JAM rabbi.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of him.
He's amazing.
Yeah.
He took me on a Poland trip, and that was really cool. My mom's family is Polish, and I never ever related to that side of my family history because we were Israeli and we were Sephardi and we were this and that, and then my mom's family was just like Europe. And so I remember going to Poland, and it was like this insane experience of being where my family was, and it was a little traumatic, and by a little I mean a lot, but I think it's super important for people to see what happened there.
Traumatic in what ways?
Just being in a place that's just full of death. Poland is kind of like a dead country. There's nothing there. And I don't know, just I remember when I was in Auschwitz 1, I had this, I can't even explain it. I just couldn't exist in that space. It was so overwhelming. I was freaking out. Among other things, I remember, I spent my 19th birthday at my Majdanek concentration camp, which is the only concentration camp that still has its gas chambers. So that's always a fun sentence to say, especially to Goyim. I spent my birthday in a gas chamber. They don't know how to react to that, and I think that's funny, but I have a weird sense of humor. And I remember it was kind of like a stepping stone in my Baal Tshuva journey. It wasn't anything. I just remember there was this modern Orthodox girl on the trip, and over the course of the trip, I saw her lose her belief in Hashem, and it was so heartbreaking. And I remember her saying I just can't imagine that that something this evil could exist in the world. And I remember at that moment thinking, But if that measure of evil can exist, then that has to mean that that measure of good can exist too. And that really like strengthened my belief. And then I remember after this is like such an LA thing to say, and it makes me sound so shallow, but to me, I think it's a part of my growth and whatever. But my sister and I always talked about like getting matching noses because we were Jews in LA. And I remember after that, she had sent me like a picture, like nose inspiration, like, oh my gosh, we should get this one. And I remember being like, that's the nose of the oppressor, like, and like it really affected me, like being there. I was like, why do I want to look like a German? Like, why do I want to look like a European? Why am I trying to like deny my face? My face is the face my family gave me. And so like, I mean, it sounds like super shallow, but to me it was just kind of like this complete shift in mindset. It was like, who am I? Like, what is this? Like, what does it mean to have like a face even? I don't know. And
You have a
then,
beautiful nose, by the way.
thank you.
I'm glad you didn't change it.
Thank you. I think my nose is like, it's whatever. It's like very Syrian, which I've come to really love.
Yeah.
I think I have a very Syrian face. I look like my Savta, who's beautiful. And I like never got that growing up because I grew up in Santa Clarita is a very like conservative pocket with like neo-Nazis. And so like it was very white supremacy.
So how did you, when you came back from that trip, what did you change? What changed in your life when you came back from that trip to Poland?
Like honestly, I think I had a little PTSD, so I was like working with that. It was like really traumatic, and like adjusting was really difficult. And I remember I was like meeting with Rabbi Handfling like at a coffee shop on campus, and I had spoken. We were taking a theater. I got a degree in theater, and in our theater history class, we were speaking about a play called A Tempest by Aim Cesar, which is a 1960s retelling of The Tempest by William Shakespeare, which is like anti-imperialism, anti-slavery, which is like great, but it's also kind of extremely anti-Semitic. And when I pointed out like anti-Semitic slurs and the use of Commedia dell'arte masks and all this stuff, which has real anti-Semitic history, in class, I was shut down very quickly by the professor and by other like non-Jewish students. And I remember this girl came by while I was having this conversation with my rabbi about like how annoyed I was that like we're reading this play that has Commedia dell'arte is like a Renaissance Italian theatrical form wherein the villain is literally a Jew and he has a mask with like a giant nose. Right. And this is actually the form of like comedy that has influenced all modern comedy. Like every single, like that's why when you see a villain, like think Mr. Burns, he's like slouched over, has the hook nose, he's going like this with his hands and he likes money. Like that caricature has presented itself throughout almost all of our media. Like think about every single villain and how Jew-coded they are. So I was talking to him about this, and a student from like a fellow classmate walked by, and she said something like, I don't like how you're representing Jews, and she like just went off at me about like how I was like trying to shut down this conversation about racism, which wasn't what I was trying to do at all. I was just saying like, if we're going to be anti-racism and anti-colonialism and imperialism and slavery, which I agree with, like why are we doing that? Why can't we talk about how anti-Semitic this is? I don't think that takes away from the message that's trying to be like given through this
really
play.
Just adds to the conversation.
Yeah, and she like basically told me that I should shut up and that I was privileged. And I remember when she said I was privileged, I was just coming back from this experience in Poland, and I was like, you know what? Yeah, I am privileged. None of my ancestors could have spoken out against anti-Semitism, and I have that privilege. How dare I not use it? And it was so awkward because this entire conversation was my rabbi's like sitting right there, just like watching it happen. I'm like, and I told her like, why didn't you say anything in class? Like you could debate me in class. Like this is weird. You're just like showing up at a one-on-one coffee meeting. Yeah. And she was like, it wasn't my place. I'm like, and this is? Like, who are you? And to this day, this girl, I never spoke to her. The only time she's ever initiated conversation with me was to shut me down when I was talking about anti-Semitism. There were like a couple other instances.
Was she Jewish?
She was, her dad's Jewish, and she grew up going to church. So like, take with that what you will. Right. But, and you know, completely like does not express Judaism in any way. Right. She doesn't, whatever.
Is that the first time that you spoke up about anti-Semitism or against anti-Semitism?
I don't think so. I think I've always been, but like in high school, I was just, a little more meek about it, I guess. I didn't really have the language that I have now to speak about it. Like, I remember in AP Euro in 10th grade, we were watching Schindler's List, and like there was a girl in the class who like pointed at me and said, let's reenact the movie. And like the AP Euro teacher who's teaching us about like how this rhetoric turns into genocide just stands there and does nothing. And like I kind of wish I could go back and just be like, hey, Mr. So-and-so, like, do you want to deal with this? Like, do you want to do your job and actually educate us about like what's going on? Like, I don't know. And I mean, high school was really weird. Like, again, there were a lot of college was more liberal anti-Semitism, whereas high school was more conservative anti-Semitism. A lot of like, you know, you killed Jesus, Holocaust jokes, someone keyed a swastika on the side of my car, like a lot of fun little things. And yeah, so I remember feeling that like anger of like being called privileged. Like, now I have this ability to speak out against my people's oppression, and I'm still being silenced. Like, what is this? I don't know.
This is where all the passion started. This is where everything's come to, where you post these videos on TikTok.
Yeah.
We have like over 22,000 viewers, and your videos are just out of control. I mean, amazing.
Thank you.
I mean, I just want to like high five you on the video, like yeah. I mean, completely tear down our podcast is called Living in Clarity because like you live in clarity. You want to know the truth. Mm-hmm. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think. I mean, it's like so bizarre that it's become even a platform for me. I really started when COVID hit. I was just bored and I saw people being wrong on the internet, and I'm just obnoxious. And I was just like, honestly, just like speaking into a void just because I wanted to voice my opinion, not thinking anyone was going to hear. And all of a sudden, I had like this following, and I had people who like loved me, and I had people who really hated me, and like.
How much hate comments do you? Let's hear about this.
I think it's like people always ask me, how do you deal with the haters? I'm like, I laugh at them. I think they're ridiculous. Have you seen what happens to the people who hate the Jewish people throughout history?
Right.
Like,
yeah, we get it.
Yeah.
We get it also on this podcast.
Yeah.
We've had people say, big noses, money.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know if you read them.
Unrelated to any topic we've ever discussed.
Yeah,
typical Jew stuff. Yeah, typical big nose stuff.
It's really funny. I leave most of it up. Do you delete it? Do you leave them up or you delete it?
I mostly leave it up.
Yeah, leave it up.
Answer it?
Huh?
Do you answer it?
Sometimes. I think it's really fun to just kind of like mess around with them. But there have been like, I've been doxxed. My personal information, my home address, my phone number had been leaked, and like it was being posted all over like Palestinians' accounts. So like I couldn't even delete it. I could just report it, and like that was scary because I thought,
Which home?
In America.
Yeah.
It was like my family. I don't want to. And I remember after the first time it happened, I was nervous because I was still kind of new to it. I thought, oh my gosh, my mom's gonna like force me to like take down my TikTok, and I get it. And I remember she said, you're not allowed to stop making videos.
Your mom said that?
Yeah.
Yeah, Mom.
Yeah, she's amazing.
I love your mom.
I love her too. She's incredible. And she was like, you're not allowed to stop because if you stop, then they win.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I was like, yes. My mom's amazing. So is my dad. My whole family is amazing. I'm a big fan. I got very lucky. And so, and then I remember one time it happened again, like I was in Israel and my home address back in America got leaked, and I was like freaking out because I was like, that's not going to affect me. That's like, but like we dealt with it in whatever way we could, and the police weren't such a big help, but thank God nothing horrible has happened. And I mean, like, but most of it, I mean, a lot of it's like stuff about my appearance or stuff about me being like a baby killer, or like a genocidal maniac, fun little quirky little traits. But I mean, most of it is just based in like complete shtus. It's just ridiculous, and it's laughable.
A lot of it's
Before we talk about what you're posting and what you're advocating for, I'm curious how it transitioned from this anti-Judaism, which you experienced on campus, first of all from high school, from the conservative side, then to the liberal side, and now to supporting Israel and going. Yeah, is it the same? Are you advocating for the same thing, or has it morphed and shifted?
I've always been like a huge Zionist. Even in high school, I was, talking about the conflict and posting about it, and like definitely like on a smaller scale, but now just as I get older and as I meet new people and as I'm living in Israel for a little over 2 years now, obviously my opinions shift and they grow, and that's just, I think it's more a result of just me being like more knowledgeable. I'm learning more, I'm researching more, and the more conversations I get into, the more opportunities I have to, get into the details, things that I normally wouldn't have looked up. And so I'm basically the same stance, Jews have a right to live here. I know that's very controversial. I think Jews have a right to live everywhere. Maybe we shouldn't kick the Jews out of places anymore. I don't know. But I think now, not only is it that I have researched more and I feel more confident in my historical knowledge, but also now that I'm observant, that definitely colors the way I see the world. Yeah. I don't make content being like, you should believe in the Jewish people living here because God said so, because obviously no one's going to listen to that. I talk about historical claim and indigenous claim, but at the end of the day, like, why do I believe I should live here? Because God told me to live here. Right. God told me to live in this land and work this land and own this land. And bottom line, that's all I care about. But
I always wonder how people come here. It might be controversial, I'm going to say, but I wouldn't live here if God didn't tell us. If the Torah did not say that we should live here, I'd go back to Maryland. It's a lot easier. Yeah. Right. So why do people live here that aren't the people that come to Israel live here that aren't religious? Mm-hmm. Why do they come? I mean, first off, it's definitely a part of the Geula process. Right. I 100%. I mean, what is Geula? Explain Geula. The redemption process. Bringing all the Jews back to Israel. Yeah. Right. So in Isaiah, I think it's 52:12, it talks about how one of the signs for Mashiach, the Messiah coming, is that the Jews will come back slowly and steadily, not because we're being chased out of any other lands, but because we want to be here. Right. And I think that, I don't know, on a Kabbalistic level, I heard that the generation who, of the early, political Zionists who came back and, reestablished the country was a Gilgal generation, a reincarnated generation of the generation that was in the desert. Oh, desert. And the interesting thing about the generation that was in the desert was they did all but 2 mitzvot, and those were being in Eretz Israel and Brit Milah. Right. So, circumcision. And this other generation who's coming back and building the land, who's completely secular, who's saying we don't need the Chas v'Shalom, we don't need the Torah, we'll be a nation like other nations, which I think is a horrible, horrible thing to say. Not because there's anything wrong with the other nations, but because that's not us and we should be ourselves and everyone should be themselves. Right. Just clarifying. But this generation, really the only 2 mitzvot that they were doing were Brit Milah and being in Eretz Israel. Right. And so you see it's fixing that It's tikkun. They're repairing the deeds of the past. Yes. Right. So every single Jew has a Jewish neshama, has a Jewish soul that's telling them to do the right thing. And part of doing the right thing is being in Eretz Israel. So even if and I think for them it seems almost easier than Shabbat or Kashrut or whatever it is, that they're okay, I'll just live in the land and then that's a mitzvah. Yeah. It is. And it's better to come here or not. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Also, I mean, you see if they're not, if a Jew is not Shomer Shabbat and he's not living in Israel, the chances of his grandchild being Jewish are almost none. It's less than 4%, I think. Something like that. Very, very low. It's almost none. It's almost none. It is very low. If he's living in Israel. By the way, the stats are coming from the Pew Report, which is not a religious organization. It's real stats. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're terrifying to look at. Well, because all you do is 70. If you get married, if you're a Jew in America, not observant, you have a 70% chance of marrying out of faith. Ugh. And then if you double that to a second generation, it goes to less than 5%. Yeah, and I remember I know Richard Horowitz, who's one of the people who did the study. Uh-huh. He's an incredible donor. Is he from LA? Yeah. Yeah, I met him before. He's helped me get back to Israel. He's part of Aish Torah too. He was the early part of the guy at Aish Torah. Amazing. Yeah. He's an incredible person who's helped me get back to Israel multiple times. Called Dick Horowitz. Yeah. He's helped me get to Neve Seminary, and he was saying that when you look at the study, it also includes people who aren't halakhically Jewish who identify as Jewish.
Right.
So like
so less than that.
Who's halakhically Jewish is even lower than what's being reported.
Right.
But if they're living in Israel, and I think a huge part of this is the fact that we don't have secular marriage, that you have to be married through a religious court in this country, and also that you're completely surrounded by Judaism. You know, you go around America in December, you're going to see Christmas trees everywhere.
Well, that's a positive and a negative, because coming back from you grew up in the same area I did, back in Washington D.C. area. You know, if you want to feel Jewish or do something, you have to join something. You have to belong to something. Right. Where here, you don't belong to anything.
Yeah.
You just walk down. Even if you go to a bar on a Thursday night and you have a guy with the earrings, smoking a joint or something, getting a beer, and he gets a beer and he says, "Baruch atah Hashem Eloheinu melech shekol nivrot." Amen. The whole bar goes amen. Like, and they're completely off the derech, not. But he still says a bracha, and everyone says amen.
My completely secular family says amen to my brachas, which is like, I don't expect them to do that. Like, I'm saying it, and maybe this is something I should be learning from, like, I'm saying it under my breath, kind of like, oh, I'm the religious freak, but then they're like saying amen, like, more powerfully than I'm saying the bracha. I'm like, there aren't any, I really don't believe there are secular Jews in Israel. There are Jews who, like, maybe don't do the mitzvahs, but like, if you're in Israel, like, it's happening to you. There's nothing you can do about that. Like, you're here and you're doing it.
Yeah.
And in America, you can completely disconnect.
Yeah.
And
here on Sukkot, like there's no way to get around Sukkot.
Yeah.
I mean, like you go to a restaurant, you have to eat in a sukkah.
Yeah.
Like most restaurants, I should say. But in America, you don't have no idea.
Here you turn around a block and all of a sudden there's a sukkah that wasn't there the day before.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny.
I'm like giving you that drug.
It's really
Hila,
amazing.
I used to go to LA all the time for business. I stayed at a hotel on the corner of Beverly and Pico.
Okay.
It was a big hotel, and I was there in September. That was before I became observant. And I would go to the auction house on West Olympic Boulevard, and I'd always see these people, especially Syrians, carrying around a lemon and this big thing of twigs. I'm like, what are they doing with this lemon and twigs? I don't understand. Every time I come to September, there's lemon and twigs going on. I don't know what's going on. And then it's really funny because that was every time I was there every September. I used to go for like 2-3 weeks at a time, so I always came around Sukkot time.
It's incredible.
Yeah. So, but now I go back. Of course, I want to stay by Pico and go to all the great restaurants you have there.
Oh, so great. I mean, it's like an hour from my home to get to a kosher restaurant, but that's fine.
So how did you end up getting? So you came back from this Poland trip.
Yeah.
And how did you start your Baal Tshuva? How did you start coming back to Torah?
Yeah. So that summer, I went with my sister on Birthright, and I had a horrible time. I don't think Birthright. Yeah. I was like, it just wasn't Israel. Like, my family's Israeli. I grew up coming here like all the time. I know what Israel's supposed to feel like, and I didn't get that. And I remember the day we were in the Old City, our tour guide spent like 45 minutes talking about the Dome of the Rock without talking about how it was built as an act of anti-Semitism and like mocking the Jews by building on our holiest site. Just like, and it's holy to them, and da-da-da-da. And I was like, okay, like, who cares about this? Like, and we had like 20 minutes at the hotel. I'm like, why are we spending more time talking about this, like, structure on the Temple Mount that should not be there, that has nothing to do with us, that was built to like humiliate us. It was built to like suppress our hope and our desire to return and rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. Why are we talking more about that than the time we were at the Kotel? And I remember coming to the Kotel and I was just angry. And I remember talking to God. I'm like, I'm sorry, like I want to sing like my little songs that I know and do my little prayers, but I'm just
mad,
ticked off.
Yeah.
Like, what is this? Like, why don't I have time? I like have to check the clock every 2 seconds. I was like, God, I'm mad that I'm here, and like this is the situation that we have.
I had a student here at Aish Torah who just went on a birthday trip, and he said the tour guide took him to the hotel for 2 minutes. Said, "This is the holiest place for the Jewish people. Go walk around for 20 minutes." That was all he said about it. That was it.
It's so like, so I remember I was talking with like I went with UCLA, so I knew the madrichot, and I was talking to one of the madrichot about it, and I was just like so upset, and I was like, I'm sorry, like I'm just not having a good time. And then after that, my sister and I went to Berlin for a week, and that was really interesting. I remember we got on the bus like right after we landed, and I remember like I said to my sister, I was like, are you thinking what I'm thinking? And she's like, what? And she's like, which one of these people's grandpa? She's like, no, I'm not thinking that. And I remember talking to my dad after that. He was like, I thought that too when I was there. And I was like, cool, good. And we went to we had like, we did fun shopping. We saw like Sanssouci, which is beautiful, and the wall and whatever. And I remember we went to the Jewish Museum in Berlin, and like the bottom floor was this beautiful like Holocaust memorial, and like we did this horrible thing, and look at all of this Jewish life that was destroyed in this memorial, and I was like, wow, this is like really well done. Aside from like the influencers who are like taking inappropriate pictures with like some of the art displays.
Yes.
There's this one where it has all these metal faces on the ground.
Yeah.
And you like walk through it. It's supposed to be the solemn thing, and they're like, Instagram, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? And then we went upstairs, and they had this entire exhibit about how Israel is colonizing Palestine. I'm like,
they have this at the same place.
Yes, at the Jewish Museum in Berlin. I was livid. I was like, are they like justifying what they did to us? I was like trying to find like someone who worked there. I remember there was this book where you could write as a guest, and I wrote like an essay in there of like how disgusting it was that they had this with all of this like biased rhetoric against Israel. I'm like, what the actual, like what's going on? And then a couple days later we went to the Memorial for the Murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin. And sure enough, you had 1 million people taking like aesthetic pictures there. And I remember my sister would like go up to them, and she's like, do you know what this is? This is the Memorial for the Murdered Jews. How dare you? And she was like, and I was like, yeah, Dee, pop off. Like, and like now, like,
people don't think about this. Like, I had a friend who posted something. She was in Rome at the Colosseum, and she was like posting this picture of how romantic this is. And I commented, I said, 100,000 Jews were slaves to build this Roman Colosseum. They were taken from their land in Israel, came to Rome, and built the Colosseum. And she had no idea. She didn't think, and she deleted it. No one thinks. No one thinks about.
I didn't know that when I went to Italy. I'm like in Rome. I'm like, yeah, the Colosseum. I'm like, who were the gladiators?
Right.
Who was being forced to like fight to the death here?
Right.
Who was? I mean, like, it's. The world is just a Jewish grave, and it's bizarre and it's weird, and I just remember feeling like so like icky after coming home from that trip.
So what did you do about it?
I complained to my mom about wanting to come back to Israel, and she was like, maybe next summer. I was like working for her she's a lawyer. I was working as her law clerk, and we had like a hour commute, and so like in the car, it's just like, I need to get back to Israel. I didn't do it right. I need to go back. I need to go back. And then about two and a half weeks after I came home, Rabbi Hanfling had posted on Facebook like, is anyone interested in a $300 trip to Israel? And I remember I was sitting next to my mom, like on the couch at home. I was like, hey, Ima, if there was like a $300 trip to Israel, would you let me go? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, so there's a $300 trip to Israel. And she was like, okay, like ask him, see what it is. I still had like a month and a half left of summer break before going into my senior year at UCLA. And so I messaged him, and he's like, yeah, come over for Shabbos. And it was like right after I was in a short film also on UCLA campus.
Okay.
It was like through one of the summer programs. And I remember they like were awful to me, and like I saw the screening, they did some really horrible things, and I was
related to anti-Semitism.
No, just they were awful industry people, and that's how it be sometimes. And I remember like I was like driving from there to Rabbi Hanfling's house, and I was in such a horrible mood. I called my mom. I cried. I was like, they presented me in like a really bad way. Like they.
Were you trying to get into acting at the time?
Yeah.
Oh,
so,
I see. Okay.
Yeah. I was there as an actor.
Okay.
So I remember I like show up for Shabbat
actress.
dinner. Actress. Anyway. And I show up for Shabbat dinner, and I'm like too grumpy to eat anything. He's like telling me about this thing called the Akiva trip, which I'm like, I don't know what that is, and this thing called Neve, which is a seminary. I'm like, don't know what that word means. And I'm literally just sitting there in the worst mood possible. I'm not eating anything, and like his wife's a good cook. Like I was just like in a, and he's like, Akiva's like birthright, but it goes deeper, and Neve's a seminary, and they're both really cool, and whatever you want. And I'm like, Rabbi, I just need to be back in Israel. If you put me in a box and poke a couple holes in it, I'll be fine. And he brought that up every single time I was in Bidud when I was in quarantine. He's like, remember? And I was like, yeah. So he's like, okay, the Akiva trip, which is run by Rabbi Klatzko, who I had no idea who that was at the time. He's like, Shabbat.com. I'm like, over my head. And he was like, so the Akiva trip leaves a week from Sunday. Are you willing to go in a week? And I was like, if my mom says yes, yeah.
What grade were you? What year in college was this?
I was going into my senior year. Okay. So I was 19 at the time.
Right.
And my mom says yes. That Sunday I fill out the application. The trip's already like overbooked. I don't know why they were like still accepting applications, but thank
There's
God
always
they
room.
were.
There's always room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially with Rabbi
And
Katzko.
yeah, and Rabbi Hampling was like, he said if I had like a real superstar, I'm like, what? Like, okay, fine. And I remember Rabbi Katzko called me, and I was like, yeah, I just want to go back to Israel. Like, I never had any intention of becoming from in any capacity. It was not even on my radar. And I was just like talking about like, I want to go to Israel. I want to do the army. I want to do this. I want to do that. And he was like, cool. And I was like, also there's like this Nevi thing. And he was like, oh yeah, Neve. And I'm like, yeah. So like, I already did vacation this summer. I have no money, but like, so I don't think that, and he's like, don't worry about it. He literally just offers to pay for my seminary. I don't even know what seminary is. And he's like, yeah, don't worry about it. I'm like, okay, cool. So in the course of like a week and a half, I find out about the trip, and I'm on a plane to Israel for 6 weeks.
Right.
You were hoping to get what out of that trip?
I just wanted
Just
to
to
be in
Israel.
And do it better than
And
birthright.
then
So what happened
yeah,
when you got on
so
this trip?
I remember like I flew to Newark to meet up with the trip,
Yeah.
and I remember like there was like this voice in my head that was like, you should try Shomer Negia for this trip. And I was like, okay, weird voice in my head. Sure.
What's Shomer Negia?
Shomer Negia is where you don't touch members of the opposite sex
Right.
or not your immediate family. And I had been like arguing with Rabbi Handfling about it for a year.
Yeah.
And I was like, because it really like there was something about it that like it interested me, but it also bothered me.
Right.
And I was like, okay, like 2 weeks, like fine. And then I like get there, and like a couple days in, I remember the first day we were going to the hotel and everyone had brought their own sitter.
Yeah.
And I was like, these are people who care. You know, because on
Yeah.
Birthright, it was like there were people on my trip who didn't even know what the hotel was.
Right.
Like I was like, what? And so a couple days in, it's Tu B'Av. We're either on the bus, like to or from Amuka, and I'm sitting down next to Rabbi Katzko and having like a complete breakdown. I'm like, I have to be from now. Like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Like, I'm an actor. Like, I can't do any of this. I'm literally having like the biggest meltdown on this bus. You know.
Wait, what day into the trip was this?
The trip started on the 11th of Av, and this was Tu B'Av, so 4 days in.
4 days in. That's
Yeah.
quick.
Yeah.
Usually it takes at least 6 days to get
So
to
4 days in, you're like, this is all turned on.
I think it was before 4 days in. It was just that's when it really hit.
Right.
Um,
Were you learning it back with Rabbi Hansling back in LA about?
we were like, I don't know. It was just like anytime I had a question, we would just get into it. So
Right.
like he gave me the magic touch when I like asked him about Shomer Negia. So
Right.
like I'd already kind of like, whatever. And then that Shabbat we were on our way to Tzfat, and I had a friend on the trip, Carly, and she was already Shomer Shabbos.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think I want to try to keep Shabbat this week. And she was like, okay, we'll make sure that everyone in our hotel room is keeping Shabbat.
Yeah.
Like, I'll help you. Like, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Like, she was there for me. And, like, that Shabbat, I kept my first Shabbat, and I've been keeping it since, which is, like, insane. Because, like, again, like, it wasn't a process for me. It was just like, oh, this is real. We're doing it,
Yeah.
you know?
I just got the chills. It's so awesome.
It's
So
amazing.
So I was just staffing the Akiva trip back in August, and the first Shabbat of the trip was on the 16th of Av, which is my Shabbat anniversary.
Yeah.
So I was keeping like exactly 3 years.
Yeah.
It's a Shabbat, and like I don't know, I was like crying while I was like talking to the students. I'm like, Shabbat's so amazing. Like, it's changed my life. And
They think you're nuts, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. It's fine.
Yeah.
Like I think I wear being nuts well. You
Yeah.
know, I've always been like I have like chronic middle kid syndrome.
Yeah.
Like I need to be I was an art kid, you know, it's not so far off. And so the rest of the trip happens. I go to Neve, they teach me like here's how to practically do this thing. I get back to UCLA
For 4 weeks.
For 4 weeks.
Oh, short
Yeah.
stint.
I
It's a pretty
was
long
there.
time though when she wasn't planning on even being in Israel.
Oh, so you stayed?
Yeah.
You only come for 6 weeks, and then
So 2 weeks were the Akiva trip and 4 weeks were Neve.
Okay.
And I got back to America the day before my senior year started at
Yeah, right.
UCLA. I show up and like all my, friends from theater are like, hey, and I'm like, boys, don't touch me. And they're like, oh, she's had like a stroke. And so I'm like, obviously bizarre to everyone because theater is like especially touchy-feely.
Yes, yeah.
And
I was in theater.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeehaw. And there's actually, this is one of my favorite stories of like when I first became from, this is like, I always joke that I think cowboys are really holy, like to me, and this is why. I know it's a weird, anyway. So we got back to school and the fall show was an original post-apocalyptic Western about like gun violence, and it was really weird but really well done, like a brilliant show by Ryan Stevens, who was an MFA at the time.
What is that? What is that?
Like he was in the master's program for playwriting.
Okay.
And so that's like the fall show, and I show up to audition. It's like the second day of Rosh Hashanah, and I like had a friend sign me in, and I remember going up to the assistant stage manager. I'm like, this is not my signature, but I approve of it, and she's like, okay. And so I go and I do my audition, and basically there was like a funny little comic relief sidekick character, and I was like, oh, that's what I'll play, because that's what I always play. I'm always comic relief. I'm never like the lead. And we get the callback list, and I wasn't called back for that role, and I was like, oh, I'm just like not going to be in the show. But I got called back for like the villain and the main character and like someone else. So I show up to the callbacks. I'm like, maybe they like forgot to put me on the list, and they'll like decide that they want me to do the callback for this like sidekick, and they didn't. And I think like it was the very end of the callback, I'm like doing like this monologue for the main character, who's called Rose of Sharon, which actually comes from Shir HaShirim, Chabat Salat HaSharon. And I definitely told them about that. I was like, I'm gonna make this so Jewish. And so I'm doing this monologue about where she's like recounting this like school shooting she experienced when she was in first grade. And like the first time I do it, it was like so bad. And she was like, tell it like a joke. And I remember that piece of direction was like so brilliant. I like started telling it as a joke, and by the end of it, I'm having a breakdown. It was amazing. And so I'm like feeling good. And I remember it was like, I was like praying the whole time. I was like, Hashem, like I really want this. I really want to be a part of this. And also this is like a show where there's no romantic plot, which for a show with a female lead is extremely rare.
Right.
Like I didn't want to be stage kissing people.
Right.
I like, I decided that like for theater I would touch, but like, and outside of that I wouldn't, but like that was just kind of a lot. And so the fact that this didn't have a romantic plot within it, and it had a story that I really loved and I thought was really well done, I was like so excited. And so I remember it's like Friday, I'm like checking my email, like we're supposed to get the cast list out. I'm like freaking out, and like right before, I was like, if she doesn't put out the cast list before Shabbat, I'm literally gonna go insane. It came out before Shabbat. I got the lead. It was incredible. I remember like I was in the laundry room and I like got it, and I called my mom. I'm like, Baruch Hashem, I got Rose of Sharon. It was like the first thing that came out of my mouth was Baruch Hashem. And so whenever we're starting it, and the rehearsal schedule is on Fridays, we have from 7 to 11, and then on Saturdays we have from like 1 to 5, something like that. And so that first Friday, I mean, I'm walking there, and at this point I've really only obligated myself in not using my phone, but till then there was no reason to do anything else to break Shabbat, because I was in such a good, Shabbat environment. So I remember the first Friday of rehearsals, I like did my like pathetic little kiddush by myself, and I had like a cheese sandwich for my Suda, and I'm like crying, oh my God, like I love Shabbos, and I want to do this. And like right before that was Sukkot, and I remember like saying goodbye to Rabbi Handling for the quarter. I was like, I won't see you anymore because I'm going to be doing this thing. And he's like, you'll be back. And I was like, I have rehearsal. And he was like, you'll be back. So I'm like crying. I'm like going all the way to, I'm walking to rehearsal. I'm like, should I write? Should I not write? Because the entire first week of rehearsals is just taking notes. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, how do I do this? And I show up, and I remember like in a second, I turned to the stage manager. I say, Tatum, can you sign me in? I can't write today. It just kind of came out of me. And Sarah, the director, who's a secular Jew, which sometimes they can be a little more hard on religious Jews than non-Jews. She turns to me and she's like, did you just say you can't write? And I said, yeah, it's Shabbos. And she was like, oh, okay. And then like whatever, like my non-Jewish friends are like taking notes for me, and then the next week we get to rehearsal, and it's we're like in a circle like checking in right before we get into it, and she's saying, I'm thinking of changing the rehearsal schedule so that we have Friday nights off, and then we have extra rehearsals on Saturdays, but the way it would align was that our lunch break would be when Hillel was having lunch, and it's a 5-minute walk away, and we get out before Seudat Shlishit. So I'm like, if we get Friday nights off, I get all 3 of my Shabbat meals. And I'm like, I would like to have Friday nights off so I could go to my Shabbat meal at Rabbi's house. And then one by one, every single person in the circle says that they don't want Shabbat or Friday night off. And I'm like, sitting there, I'm like, well, it was fun while it lasted.
Yeah.
And then it finally gets back to Sarah, and she's like, okay, well, I think I'm going to do it anyway because Hila's our lead, and she's already giving up so much to be here. And I was like,
Oh my God! Wow.
Isn't that
and I
amazing?
think, you know how they say, like, more than the Jew keeps Shabbat, Shabbat keeps the Jew.
Yeah.
It felt like that. It was like because I decided to take that extra step and not write,
Yeah.
she was like, this is really important to her.
Right.
And I remember I like texted Rabbi Hampling, I'm like, so I'm coming back. He's like, I told you. And so like that to me, it was like a cowboy show. So like every time I see cowboys, I like, it's like, I remember that like hug from Hashem.
Right.
Yeah, that was an incredible
That's quite a
show.
story.
Yeah, it was like, that's my Shabbos story.
So how'd you get to Israel? Back to Israel.
Yes. So I went back to Neve for like 2.5 weeks during winter break over Hanukkah. And then I came back and COVID hit. And I was like, Mashiach is coming. Like, I can't not be in Israel. And so, but then Neve.
Everyone here, by the way, thought the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Everybody, because it was really funny because it was the first time the most Passover Seders in the history of the world was at Pesach.
Really?
Wow.
Because so many people couldn't go anywhere. So everyone had a Pesach Seder at home.
Wow.
Oh, that's
my
really
gosh.
beautiful, actually.
We had our own family. We didn't have guests. We
Yeah.
had no guests.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Ugh. Hashem.
So where were you at the beginning of COVID? During like
Yeah, so
Purim?
I went back
started?
home, which was also like, I remember that Hanukkah, I was like trying to move out of my sorority house because I was having to pay for non-kosher food and I didn't have access to a kitchen and it was like a whole thing. And then COVID hit. I was like, okay, I'm like moved out of my sorority house. It's like easier to keep kosher because my home is kosher. But now it's harder to keep Shabbos because I don't have
a community. Right.
And so like every Shabbat was just like me reading alone in a room.
Why did you go? Why didn't you go to LA? Why didn't you?
COVID.
Was your
Oh,
sister
right,
starting
right,
to
right,
connect
yeah.
a little bit? Do anything with you?
No, my sister lives in Oregon, and it wasn't like I was the only one who like was in on this, and everyone was, you know.
And the Chabad house that you grew up going to was farther than you could walk, or
yeah, they told me.
But it's
they
closed.
told
It's
me
closed.
after-
It's closed.
COVID,
It didn't
right?
matter.
Also, they told me after the fact, like I could have come, and I was like, I just didn't think to ask because like everything was.
Yeah,
you know,
Chabad
it
doesn't
would've
close.
been- Yeah, they're amazing. Because I was
close.
back in America a while ago, and oh my gosh, it was amazing. I like. I mean, this is like this rabbi was at my baby naming. You know, my family has been members of this synagogue since before my older sister was born. Like I grew up with these people, and I remember like going and I was like having coffee with the Rebbitzin, and she was like in tears. She was like, "You're our Hila. Like, look at you. You're dressed so snua." Like, it was so sweet. And I spent a lot of Shabbosim when I was back in America there, but at the time, anyway. So Neve closed, so I had like nowhere to stay in Israel. But like as soon as it opened, so for 6 months I was just doing Shabbat on my own. And I remember like when I first got back
In Santa Clara.
Yeah.
In LA.
So when I first got back, it was struggling with kashrut. I was food insecure while I was on campus. There was not a lot of access to kosher food.
Right.
I was living off of like cereal and chips, which was such a healthy diet. And then after that, I was struggling with. I had like my test in Shabbat, and I remember like thinking like you're gonna be tested and you know the answers, but like they were still really hard. And then so about 6 months after COVID hits, Neve reopens, and 2 weeks later I'm back there. And I remember my parents were like, "Why don't we wait for this to blow over?" I was like, "No thanks, no thank you. I'm done. Like I need to be back in Israel." And it was such a blessing because we had the entire campus was like its own capsule. So we had social lives, and we had people to be
Coming
with.
from California, that must have been a major difference.
It was incredible. So I you know, we obviously had to quarantine when we got there, and then, you know, we had a roommate get COVID, and then we had to quarantine, and then I got COVID, which honestly I was like kind of, obviously there were like horrible cases. Thank God I'm, you know, young and healthy, and I didn't have such a bad case. But I was so stoked when I got it because it meant that I would have antibodies for Purim, and Purim's my favorite. And like I didn't have enough time to get fully vaccinated because that's when the vaccines were like starting to come out. And I was like, I remember I was like doing the math in my head. I was like, so if I go tonight to get tested and I have COVID, then I'll be out of bidud by this date, and I'll be out in time for Rosh Chodesh Adar, and I can come to the Chorba to do Hallel.
That's a party
and, like,
animal. Who's like hoping to get COVID so you can go to a party.
Listen, I was like, if I'm
not just
gonna
any
get
party.
COVID,
No, not even Purim.
This is Purim.
This is Purim. Like, if I'm gonna get COVID, like, I might as well get it so I have antibodies for the best holiday.
So for Neve, do they keep the first day Purim or the second day Purim in Neve?
Second, Shushan Purim.
Shushan
in
Neve?
It's in Yerushalayim.
It's in Jerusalem, so you do the second day.
Yeah, but that Purim was
it's kind of a question where in Jerusalem that.
So because I think it's because you can see the walls or something like that. It's like, but.
There's a place in Nachalot that doesn't do the Shushan Purim. Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah. They have kept it.
So that Purim was actually Shushan Purim was on Shabbat. Mm-hmm. So we had 3 days of Purim. Yeah. Like 2 different costumes. It was like my first costume was, I'm really proud of this. It was Moshe B'Teva. It was like Moses in the basket. I had like blue and I cut out like reeds and fish and then I got a basket and I like made a contraption. My head was sticking out of it.
That's amazing.
I was like one of the only people dressed up for Megillah and I was like, I don't care. Like this is so cool. And then for Shushan Purim, I was Esther, which I think I'm just gonna keep being Esther for Shushan Purim.
You might as well. That's your favorite, right?
She's the best person in the world. And
so you stayed in Israel after that. You didn't leave.
So I left basically after Sukkot last year, because I graduated in 2020. They weren't doing our graduation until like October of last year. And so I went home for my graduation, and my cousin was getting married in Mexico, and like 2 weeks after that, and I was like, okay, I'll be in America, Mexico for like 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks. And then the borders closed, and I hadn't finished Aliyah, and I got stuck in America for 4 months.
This was last year, 2021.
Yeah, so like it was around Thanksgiving time that the borders closed. And so for Hanukkah, I ended up going to Crown Heights. I have a friend there, and that was really cool. Like, with all the Chabadniks, we went to like a Zusha concert, and I was like, okay, like, you know, I'm with the Jews. And then Baruch Hashem, you don't know Rachel Schwartz. She was on my Akiva trip when I was, anyway, one of my friends who was on the Akiva trip that I was on, and we kept our first Shabbat together, and we would celebrate our Shabbat anniversaries together. She was getting married in Baltimore.
Oh, nice.
And I wasn't supposed to go because I was supposed to be in Israel. And so
you were in New York. You wanted it down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was amazing. No, I like flew back.
Where does she live now?
And, she's in Georgia, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. I was like, I flew back to LA, and then later that week flew to, because I had to be there for my Gregorian birthday because my sister was in town, and like I hadn't seen her in over a year, whatever. So like it ended up being like a successful trip back to America. But I'm happy that I'm here, and I don't plan on going back anytime soon.
Are you going to still be doing Israel advocacy? Are you still?
Yes.
Do you post every week? Tell us your posting schedule.
Don't have one.
Okay.
I'm very like, I don't know. I have like zero attention span, so it's kind of just like when the
idea comes,
hits. Like
right.
Yesterday, I was. I told you guys I was like digging under the Kotel Plaza, and I found some bones, and I'm really stoked about these bones. They're like 1,300 year old, probably chicken bones, but like we don't know. They have to go to a lab, and I'll probably never find out what they were. But I was like, so I made a video about like digging up bones. I'm like, bones.
What's your biggest video?
My biggest video was like one that was like so like easy to make. There was like a news channel that was reporting about a Nazi war criminal who's like over 100 years old who's being taken to trial. And I stitched the video, and I was like, wow, 100 years old, you say? Crazy. And then I played Cell Block Tango from Chicago, which is He Had It Coming. And it got like, I think it has almost 1 million views, like something insane like that.
Wow. This is on TikTok.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I was like, all the ones that are like well researched, and I'm like, they have like a couple hundred, couple thousand, but this one got like insane.
It's a stupid one.
But it's fun. If there's one thing I believe in, it's making fun of anti-Semites. They deserve it.
Right.
I want to talk about that a little bit and tie it into like why your love for Purim. And where did all the love for Purim come from, and the love attacking and facing anti-Semites? Where does it all come from?
I think I've always been like intrigued by Purim. My mom's name is Esther, and you know, I'm a theater kid, so like dressing up and partying has always been, and also like feminism, right? You have like the strong female lead. It was always like very exciting, and I remember as a little kid, like we would always miss Purim, and I was always really upset about it. And when I was in Israel that time that I went on the Akiva trip, the last Shabbat I spent in Israel that time was in Nachlaot. I was with Rabbi Kilstein, who's now one of my rabbis.
He's a Neve, right?
Yeah, he's incredible. And so I went to, actually Yitzi Klatzko was hosting, Rabbi Klatzko's son was hosting like this big meal in Nachlaot with like all of these Jewish hippies, which I love.
That's so cool.
And I remember I was sitting next to someone talking about Purim, and he was like, yeah, like Mordechai and Esther, or Esther, you know, when she went to the king, it was like this whole thing because of adultery. I'm like, what are you talking about? And she's like, Mordechai and Esther were married. I was like, I think my brain broke. And like literally since that moment, I have not stopped researching. I have a Megillah in my backpack. Like if I open that backpack, I have a pocket Megillah in there.
Yeah.
I like something about it. I was like, why didn't I know this? And then the more I researched, the more I realized it's so not the story we hear as little kids.
Right.
And it's probably for the best.
Yes.
Little kids probably shouldn't be hearing that story, but it's just, and Esther specifically, I see in her a lot of, she succeeds where I personally fail.
So interesting.
She's very like, I'm so out there and boisterous and whatever, and she has like perfected like modesty, and I really look up to her for that. And she uses this like real, a lot of my, I think my biggest critique of modern feminism is that it forces women to kind of give up their femininity rather than allowing them to. Judaism's idea is that masculinity and femininity are both important, and there are masculine women and feminine men, and that's okay. But like modern feminism is like patriarchy. If you act like a man, then you'll have value. And so to have a heroine who is so secure in her femininity, and that's not a weakness, I think is just extremely inspiring. And I mean, like, I kind of joke that destroying Amalek is my favorite mitzvah. And, nowadays it's obviously like we don't know who Amalek is, so I'm not killing people. But Amalek is the gematria of Suffolk, which means doubt. It's about, killing doubt in God, and it's about fighting anti-Semitism and this like visceral hatred of the Jews. It's about shutting that down. And I think that I just really connect to that idea of, it makes me feel like I'm a little warrior.
It's clear that there's so much passion there.
I think it's fun.
How do people find you on TikTok? How do they search your name?
So my @ on TikTok is @totallykosher. On Twitter, I'm @toteskosh, which was my original handle on TikTok, and then that account was permanently banned because
Why?
because I was mass reported by a bunch of Muslims after I talked about how I hate the Dome of the Rock and how it was built as an act of anti-Semitism. They did not like that.
Wow.
But I think they should learn the difference between the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa before telling me how holy it is.
I know, because Dome of the Rock is not a place where they worship.
It's not a mosque.
What is
No,
the
it's not a
story?
mosque.
Yeah.
In a short
Yeah,
way as
no, so
possible.
people will call the Dome of the Rock, which is the golden dome that's currently on top of the foundation stone where, the Beit HaMikdash was. They call the Dome of the Rock Al-Aqsa or a mosque. And
It's not a
neither
mosque.
Of those
No,
things.
it's down.
Yeah.
To the left of it or the one back here?
So if you look on the Temple Mount, there's also like a grayish,
Yes.
bronzish dome, and that's Al-Aqsa Mosque. And that's technically not actually on the
Bas-
Temple Mount.
No.
It's just next to it. And so when they say, this is our third holiest site, Al-Aqsa, I'm like, well, maybe you should learn its name.
Yeah.
First, and then I'll believe you. Maybe. Just a thought. It's always funny whenever I point it out and then they still don't get it. I'm like, oh, this is just delicious.
They play soccer. They play soccer at Dome of the
They
Rock.
play soccer, they smoke, and then there was a Palestinian news outlet that was, it had videos of Jews dancing in Magad Machpelah for Simchat Torah.
Yes.
And they were like, they're desecrating the site, and like this is so meh, meh, meh. I'm like, dancing is literally holy. Like you have David HaMelech when he was bringing the Aaron to Yerushalayim, like he was dancing and sacrificing animals and like doing this whole thing. Like this is part of our practice, is dancing and singing. Like we are.
The problem is you have different definitions of the word holy than
Yeah.
other people do.
Yeah.
That's the thing. For them, holy might be throwing rocks at Jews.
For sure. But to them, I'd say we were here first, and if you don't like it, you can, like, this wasn't yours originally. You kicked us out of this, and now we're back, and, like, you wanted us to, like, pray on the side of the building.
Do you know that the hotel, which we go to right now, before the 67 war, was literally, it was a trash dump. Why do you think it's called Dung Gate?
Yeah.
It's called Dung Gate because that's where they used to, literally, that was a bathroom.
Yeah.
The hotel.
And they would have, like, their bathrooms, and, like, the wall of their bathroom would be the kotel. Like, they would build their houses against. It's like, they want to talk about desecrating holy sites. And I have the utmost respect for Islam and Muslims. It's not that I have anything against them. It's if you are actively desecrating something I believe is holy, or you are of the belief that I don't have a right to visit my holiest site, I literally could not care less.
Do you know we can't, as Jews, it's really amazing. People say, oh, it's an apartheid state. It's really crazy. Arabs
It
can
is
go
apartheid against Jews.
Against Jews.
Yeah.
Right, against Jews. Because an Arab can go anywhere in Israel, go pray anywhere he wants, go pray on the street, wherever he wants to. We see all the time. I live in Rehavia, where I see the Arabs, praying on the street. They're allowed to.
Good for them.
We are not allowed to go on the Temple Mount, and we can't even drop a quarter and bend it over because that's considered praying.
Yeah.
Right, or a shekel. We are not allowed to go into. There's certain cities we can't even go into.
I remember when I first got back here, I was like planning on going to Kever Yosef in Shechem, which is called Nablus, which comes from Neapolis, which is Latin, not Arabic. I just want to point that out because I think it's important. But we wanted to go to Shechem. We had to go like in the middle of the night on like this bulletproof bus, and then they canceled it because it was too dangerous. And then a couple months later, here they are desecrating Yosef's Kever, his grave, and it's like. You want to talk about apartheid? I remember some Western idiot was talking about like how supporting a two-state solution was saying you were okay with genocide and ethnic cleansing. I'm like, yeah, but on the other side, like they're the ones who want to genocide us. They're the ones who want to do ethnic cleansing.
It's amazing.
And I said something about like there are no Jews living in Area A, and he was like, his response was like, that's so weird that you say that because there's a lot of Jews living in the West Bank. I'm like, do you know what Area A is? Because if you don't, maybe you should not talk about this conflict, buddy. Maybe you should stay in your like privileged Western country where you're on someone else's land and shut up a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm curious what the connection is. If it's something that's been thrown around a lot in circles I've been in, which is that anti-Israel is also anti-Semitism. I want to hear what you have to say about that and how that's true or not true.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people define Zionism differently because Zionism has many movements within it. You have political Zionism, secular Zionism, religious Zionism, and within that there are so many different, two Jews, three opinions, you got a country of them. It's a lot worse.
Yeah, we have no government.
Yeah.
Israel has no government. Yeah, fifth election.
No, I remember like the last election, I like hadn't finished Aliyah yet. I'm like, there'll be another one in a couple months. We're good, it's fine. But the way I define Zionism is the belief that the Jewish people have the right to self-determination and self-defense in their indigenous homeland. And that doesn't mean that, I say all the time, just because Palestinians are an indigenous does not mean they don't have a right to live here. They should live here, they should have peace. But I don't believe that their freedom of movement trumps my security in life.
Right.
When you look at that specific definition of Zionism, that it's just that Jews have a right to live here, there's no way to oppose that without being an anti-Semite. To say that Jews can't live in any country, let alone their indigenous homeland, makes you an anti-Semite. But especially so when it's the place we're indigenous to.
Right.
And I'm always shocked by when people say, well, anti-Zionism is just criticism of
Israel
as a state. I'm like, babes, have you met an Israeli? I don't think there's a single Israeli out there who has not criticized the government.
Right.
Like, that's not it. How do we manage to do it without like bringing up blood libel and delegitimizing our history? It's definitely possible to criticize the Israeli government. That's literally all we do here, and that's why we don't have a government right now.
Right.
Like, that's not what it is. That's not why we think you're anti-Semitic. We think you're anti-Semitic because you don't think we have a right to live here. You don't think we have a right to statehood when we acquired statehood legally and through a defensive war.
Right.
And by any other standard for any other country, we are more legitimate because not only was it given to us by the previous occupiers, not only did we win a defensive war to gain it, but we're the indigenous peoples of this land. We're from here. Palestinians are from different Arab countries. The word Palestine comes from the Plishtim. The root of Palesh means invade. Palestine literally means invaded land, and that's why Emperor Hadrian called this land Syria Palestina. The Roman emperor, who should rot wherever he is, may his name be erased, he called it Syria Palestina. It wasn't some, Arab who called it that. He called it that because he wanted to distance Jewish identity from this land, which was called Judea. Jewish does not denote a religious belief. Ish, the suffix ish, does not mean a religious belief. It means a nationality, like English, Danish, Scottish.
Right.
Jewish means of Judea, and that's why the word for Judean in Hebrew is the same word as Jew, Yehudi.
Right.
And I don't know. It's just so obviously just another cover for anti-Semitism. The way that anti-Semitism works is that in every generation, it takes on the form of what that generation deems to be the most evil thing. So, when Christianity was the big thing, we're the ones who killed Yashki. When racial purity was the big thing, we were the polluters of the white race.
Yes.
And now when human rights are the big thing, as they should be, we are now the white colonizer human rights abusers. And I'm like, no. Also, Arabs colonized the entire Middle East and North Africa, and no one wants to talk about that because they're not white,
Right.
which is infantilization of people of color, and that's called racism. When you say like, oh, but they're brown, so they can't. Yeah, they can, and they did. My family lived under dhimmi laws. My Syrian family in the 30s had to pack their bags and leave and walk here because they couldn't live in Syria anymore because the colonizers kicked them out. So, and that's not even just like with the Jews. I mean, there's countless Middle Eastern and North African minorities who have suffered under Arab colonization. No one wants to talk about that.
Yeah, but they killed a kid who was a gay in Hebron.
Yeah.
The Arabs killed
video?
beheaded. They
Yeah.
beheaded a guy. Came back.
There
I don't know
was
the story. He was gay, and they beheaded him.
A gay Palestinian. So the people who care about Palestinian rights, they just so happen to kind of like
Forget about that part.
Or when they're killing and silencing their journalists who speak out against them, or any number of things. I mean, it's so clearly not about the truth. It's clearly about how can we demonize Jews and feel justified in our Jew hatred. They're not anti-Zionist because they're anti-Zionist. They're anti-Zionist because they're anti-Semites, and they want to be woke about it.
Right.
They want to feel like they can virtue signal through it.
It's so, what you're saying is so logical, obviously so well researched, but in America, the opinions that you're saying, there's nowhere to voice these opinions. So I'd love to give you the opportunity to speak to any of our college or young listeners in America who face this anti-Semitism and may feel silenced. What kind of courage and strength can you give them, or advice?
At the end of the day, academia doesn't matter. I think that's such an important thing to know because I was such like a teacher's pet growing up, and I remember when that thing happened in my college classroom, it was the first time I like stood up to a professor.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, your degree, like, okay, it kind of matters and you're spending a lot of money on it, but it doesn't matter more than who you are. And you should never give up your identity for a stupid piece of paper that says that you went to classes.
Right.
If that means you're going to fail a couple of classes, it sucks, and it sucks that that's the reality, but that's so much more important than, quote unquote, doing well in school. These people, anti-Semitism feeds off of silence. It feeds off of complacency. And you have it in you as a Jew or as an ally to Jewish people, if you are an ally to Jewish people listening, you have it in you to combat that. And there are very clear ways to point out that what they're saying is wrong. And do your research, know what you're getting into, like, and fight it. You have an obligation. The thing about, this mitzvah of destroying Amalek is that, in the words of Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan on his commentary of one of Rabbi Nachman's stories, The King and the Emperor, when he's talking about Amalek, he says that there's, it's a Rabbi Nachman story, so it's really complicated to get into, but basically this woman has to like kill these pirates. And Rabbi Kaplan says that Amalek is an evil in this world that can only be fixed through its destruction. Anti-Semitism is an evil in this world that can only be fixed through its destruction. And you have an obligation to destroy it. You are not, you're not relieved of that obligation just because it's not a physical, killing. It's when someone is bringing evil into the world, you as a Jew have an obligation to destroy that evil. And it's hard and it sucks, and you're going to find out who your real friends are real fast. But at the end of the day, that's so much more important than any of like the nonsense that you're going to be fed at university, and any of the nonsense that your so-called friends who don't stick up for you are going to add to your life. And get out of Galus. Move to Eretz Israel. You're not supposed to be there. Like, come home, because really this is where we're supposed to be, and this is where we can enact the most change. This is where, like, when we're talking about this concept of being a light unto the nations, it's that we as a nation are supposed to be that light, not that we're supposed to be dispersed. We were dispersed, and now it's time to come home.
Yeah, so it's that I'm going to touch on that subject because it's not easy. And I lived in America for 54 years. We came here 3 years ago, but it's not an easy move for many people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
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 Shabbat is not an easy move for a lot of people. Doesn't mean it's wrong.
No.
Kosher is not an easy move. I was food insecure. Like, I almost passed out because I wasn't eating so much.
Right.
And like, whether or not you should make like that same sacrifice, like, that's between you and your local Orthodox rabbi. But Judaism is not supposed to be easy. Mm-hmm. I don't want it to seem, I want to be very clear. I don't think it's a burden. I don't think it's a bad, like, negative thing. It is a beautiful, beautiful responsibility that we have to this world. Right. You know, every single nation has something that they give to this world. The Jews bring morality. Right. And that is we're like the hall monitors, which kind of is a sucky, you know.
Well, that's why
everyone hates us.
That's why Hitler hated us.
Yeah.
He said it. He said
we brought two blemishes to the world. Yeah, one of the body and one of the mind.
Yeah, bris milah and morality.
Morality.
Wow.
Our
he
enemies,
said himself.
Yeah. Sometimes our enemies know us more than we know ourselves.
I've been reading a lot of books recently with Holocaust stories, and we think about what Hitler did, that he was losing in the Eastern Front, and yet he still put all his resources into going to France and Hungary and Czechoslovakia, and it's just to kill Jews. Like,
had he waited until after the war to do it, he, God forbid, would have been successful, because he would have won the war, because he wasn't. God forbid.
He was so
he was so focused on.
And this is funny, when Roosevelt refused to bomb the trains to the concentration camps, he said, I don't want to make this into a Jewish war, into a war about the Jews. But guess what? What was he going to? Why did he go to Hungary? He wanted the Jews. He wanted these countries because he only wanted the Jews. Yeah. Because he knew something that maybe the rest of the Jews don't know.
He knew that it wasn't even if you're Jewish, it's if you have like a spark of Judaism in you.
Yes.
It doesn't matter how secular you were. It doesn't matter, even if you weren't halakhically Jewish, if you had that spark in you, he knew the power of that. I wish we knew what power
That's
we had.
the power we have. He knew how much power we have.
You have so much power as a Jewish person.
I know.
To completely change the world for the better. Remember,
he wanted to be a barbarian. He wanted to be a barbarian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I said earlier, if that amount of evil can exist in the world, you personally, that one person could enact that much evil in the world, you personally, as an individual, can enact that much good. Yeah. And that's our obligation here. That's why evil exists in the world, because we're supposed to want to destroy it. That's why we don't know why bad things happen to good people and vice versa. Because Hashem, I think this is from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Hashem wants us to take issue with the way the world is and try to fix it. We are partners in creation.
Yes.
And I wish we knew how strong we are, because our enemies know, and
they know how strong we are. They do.
We don't, and I want to reiterate, even if you're not Jewish, you have. We believe that every single person has a purpose in this world and a job in this world. I'm talking specifically about it's like you need doctors and you need lawyers and you need farmers, and you need so many different professions to have a functioning society. Right. So our profession we're in the business of morality. Right. And that's kind of unpopular, but it is so unbelievably powerful. Yeah. We look around the world and we think it's generally moral. It's because of us.
The world exists now.
We talk about, I hate the term Judeo-Christian values because they're just Christian values, but the goodness that comes out of that is all Judaism. Yeah. The fact that we have courts of law and we don't do human sacrifice so much anymore, and we're not, going around and obviously this is not a perfect world and there's still a lot of mess, but the fact that there's value to human life, that's us. We did that. That's cool. Yeah. So to any Jew out there who's listening, I really encourage you to find what it actually means to be Jewish. It's not just what you heard in Hebrew school. Yeah. It's so much deeper than that. You have so much power, and you can enact so much good in this world. But you have to know who you are in order to do that. I personally think the best way to do that is by coming to Israel and by learning Torah. And, you're going to be like, oh, but that sounds really boring. It's not. Have you ever heard any of the stories from the Torah? They're all blood and guts and gore and Sefer Shmuel is more violent than Game of Thrones. Yeah. It's a party and a half. And that's us. We were the ones who stood up to the Roman Empire. No one did that. We fought them off for years. before they finally overpowered us.
Yeah.
No, and we were just like these tiny kids who like had no food.
Yeah.
Completely outnumbered.
Yeah.
Like completely.
It's not like people were like, hey, the Jews come down the street, you just cross the street. No one's scared of us.
Yeah.
Right. We're not like big muscle. We do have some big guys, but not that many.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like when there's an NFL player who's like an offensive lineman, like he becomes famous because he's like a Jewish football player in the NFL.
I have a friend who is.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
On the Browns.
Okay.
It's great.
What position?
Michael Dunn, lineman.
Oh, no. Way.
Yeah, 315 pounds.
Where'd you meet?
Wow.
Was he from?
I used to be bigger than him growing up.
No
He
way.
used to play football in his basement. I mean, we were about the same size. Whoops. And
That's so funny.
We played football on his back, and then one year he came back and he was like 3 times the size
Oh
of
my
all of
gosh.
us, and now he's in the NFL.
That's
Wow.
amazing.
So there you go. There's that lineman, the Jewish lineman.
Yeah.
The one.
Yeah, the one.
Yeah. But Pirkei Avos says, the ethics of our father says, like, who is the gibor, who is like the strong person. And it's not about physical strength. It's someone who can overcome his inclination, someone who has control over themselves.
Yeah.
And that is real strength, and that's the strength that we have. And some of us, I guess, are in the NFL, and they have that strength too. But
That's physical strength. There's also mental strength. too.
physical strength is not how we define strength.
No.
Just like physical wealth is not how we define wealth.
Right.
Physical strength, like, it exists outside of you. You don't control it. And the ability to, that's Asav, like the desire to overpower and to feel like I only am strong if I have someone underneath me.
Right.
I can have someone submit to me.
Right.
Judaism says no, like you need to control yourself. And that's even more difficult than just like punching someone and be like, meh.
Yeah.
You know, like actually,
Meh.
yeah, exactly.
That's a big punch.
That's what they say.
Yeah.
I wish you knew like how, like I'm just, to all the Jews out there, I wish you knew like how much.
Well, the problem is we don't know. Not
Yeah.
me, or all of us, but like in general, you
Yeah.
know, you speak like, you know,
We're kind of like ashamed.
my Rabbi Lori Palatnik would always say, it's not let my people go, it's let my people know. Because we don't know. People don't leave Torah. People don't leave Judaism from what they know about Judaism. It's about what they don't know about Judaism. That's the problem. No one knows anything. You're ignorant. And so because of that, ignorance and apathy, they just leave.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Wow. Hila, it's been such a pleasure having you on the
Thank
show.
you so
Yeah.
much for having me.
There's
This
so,
is so
much more
fun.
we could talk about. But we'll have to have you back
again. Yeah, wow. I can't
Oh
wait
my
to have you again.
gosh. I would love to come back. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. This was literally so much fun. I just got to geek out. So I'm happy.
Before we close, I'd love to give you one more chance to share how they can follow you, how they can find you, learn more about your perspectives, your opinions, and even how they can strengthen their own identities.
Amazing. So on TikTok, I am at Totally Kosher. On Twitter, I am at Toteskosh, TOTESKOSH. And on Instagram, I am Hila, HILA.OZ, Hila.Oz. Oz. And you can always reach out to me. I'm not the best at answering my direct messages, but I try to. And I just really encourage you to give true Torah Judaism a chance, because I think it was when I was on the Akiva trip, it was like the first time that I really saw real Torah Judaism. So, you know, there's a Chabad near you and you can say hi, and they're really nice people, or any number of campus organizations, or just
hop on the Akiva trip.
hop on the Akiva trip. That's how Brandon and I met, actually. We were staffing a trip.
Or if you're a parent, momentum.
Or momentum.
You have kids at home.
Very good.
Yeah.
And give real Torah a chance. And I think there's so much, people think that Judaism is all about like believing in God, but more than that, in this generation specifically, this is like Reb Nassan of Breslov, is like, it's more than just believing in God, it's knowing that God believes in you. You're here for a reason. He literally makes you every single day, and like we say Moda Ani, like being like, you gave my soul to me, but it's really an admission that like, oh, God expects me to do something with this day.
Yeah.
So do something with this day.
Yeah.
That's your dose of clarity. Thank you so much for listening
Wow.
to Living in Clarity podcast.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Living in Clarity podcast.
If you enjoy what you just heard, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment with any suggestions for future episodes.
We'll see you next time.